The same people who clap for you in public will sometimes sharpen their knives in private, smiling while they measure where to cut. My dear chosen ones, let that sink in for a moment. Because before we step into this truth, you need to understand exactly what you're dealing with. You were never imagining things. You were never too sensitive. And you were never wrong for feeling that quiet tension in your chest whenever certain people got a little too close. That feeling wasn't paranoia. That was awareness waking up. That was your inner intelligence whispering, something here isn't adding up. See, chosen ones, some betrayals don't slam doors. They slide in silently. They don't show up dressed like villains. They show up dressed like friends, supporters, and well-wishers. They come with compliments polished smooth like river stones, with smiles rehearsed so perfectly you'd swear they practiced them on the way to see you. They say, "I'm here for you," while forwarding your business to people who are hoping you'd trip. They stand beside you while secretly hoping life pushes you just hard enough to fall out of their way. And maybe you're wondering, why would they do that? Why act like they care if they don't? Because chosen ones, power attracts attention, both the good kind and the kind that hides behind politeness. The moment you begin to rise, even a little, the moment you outgrow the version of yourself that made them comfortable, you become a mirror reflecting what they aren't ready to face in themselves. And instead of growing with you, some people choose envy, sabotage, and performance. If you truly knew what they whispered, what they plotted, what they laughed about when your name lit up their screens, you wouldn't just distance yourself. You'd block them with the same urgency you'd have if your phone hit 1% and the charger was across the room. That's not exaggeration. That's self-preservation. Behind every "I've got your back," some of you would find a whole audience watching, waiting, analyzing your life like it's a spectator sport. Behind every "I'm proud of you," you'd see the tiny wince they tried to hide, the quiet wish that you stayed one step below them. Behind every "tell me what's going on," you'd see the curiosity of someone gathering information, not offering support. And I know, right about now, a question might be rising in your mind. How did I not see it? How did I trust someone like that? Because you're built differently. Chosen ones. Where others calculate, you care. Where others scheme, you empathize. Where others see opportunity for leverage, you see opportunity for connection. Your sincerity makes you slow to suspect. Your depth makes you slow to doubt. You see people through the lens of what they could be, not the limits of who they are. That's not a flaw. That's your power. But that same power is exactly what the wrong people try to exploit. Before we continue, my dear chosen ones, take a moment to support the very message that's supporting you. If this truth is hitting home, if it's opening your eyes, strengthening your boundaries, or giving you the clarity you've been craving, then show your love by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support isn't just a click. It fuels the work, the research, and the energy that goes into bringing you powerful, life-changing content every single time. When you engage, you help this message reach others who need the same awakening. So tap that like button, subscribe, and let's keep growing together. Some of these individuals didn't just have two faces, they had Wi-Fi connected masks that switched personalities depending on who entered the room. Different opinions, different loyalties, different stories, all uploaded and updated in real time. You were meeting versions of them, not the truth of them. And you felt the difference, even when you couldn't yet prove it. This isn't about making you suspicious. This is about making you aware, sharper, unshakable. Because once the truth hits, and it always does, it lands with a clarity that feels like someone pulled the curtain back on everything you missed. Suddenly the jokes that cut too deep make sense. The advice that confused you makes sense. The small digs disguised as humor make sense. It all clicks. And when it clicks, you stop asking, "Why did they do that to me?" Instead, you start saying, "Thank you for revealing yourself. Now watch me close every door you thought you had access to." Chosen ones, your intuition was not early. It was accurate. Your awareness was not dramatic. It was protective. You weren't too much. You weren't insecure. You were surrounded by people who thought you'd never wake up. But you did. And now you get to choose differently. So hear this clearly. If you knew what they did, what they said, what they wished behind your back, you wouldn't hesitate. You'd block them everywhere, on every device, every platform, every access point to your peace, because your peace is not negotiable. Your sanity is not public property. Your energy is not for sale. You are chosen, not because someone labeled you that, but because you moved through storms that would have drowned other people. You grew in spaces designed to break you, and that makes you powerful. Now it's time to protect that power with the same intensity people used trying to drain it. Let's go deeper. Number 1. The ones who mapped your vulnerabilities like a blueprint for control. When they treated your weaknesses like a roadmap to control. Some people don't learn you to love you. They learn you to leverage you. And the moment they think they've mapped your soft spots, they mistake your kindness for an entry point. My dear chosen ones, let's call this what it truly is. Not curiosity, not closeness, not connection, but calculation wrapped in charm. There are people who didn't step into your life to support you. They stepped in to study you. They paid attention, not because they cared, but because they wanted access. They watched the way you laughed when you didn't feel like laughing. They noticed the small hesitations, the quiet pauses, the things you thought nobody could see. They were collecting data, my chosen ones, your emotional tells, your triggers, your insecurities, studying them like a manual they plan to use later. And maybe you're thinking, why me? Why would someone go that far? Because chosen ones carry something others can't ignore: presence. You have depth, sincerity, and emotional intelligence. Those qualities attract genuine people, but they also attract those who see your vulnerability as an opportunity. To them, your softness wasn't a trait, it was a tool. Your openness wasn't connection, it was a blueprint. They came into your life quietly, softly, disguised as someone trustworthy. They didn't arrive like villains in a movie. They slid into position like actors auditioning for a role they intended to win. And they performed well. They presented themselves as listeners, helpers, supporters, someone who got you. But behind every nod, every comforting line, every "you can trust me," there was a quiet mental checklist running in the background, documenting what made you doubt yourself, what made you shrink, what made you give someone the benefit of the doubt even when you shouldn't have. My dear chosen ones, the most dangerous people are not the ones who loudly oppose you. They are the ones who silently observe you. The ones who watch your reactions the way scientists watch experiments. The ones who test boundaries just to measure your breaking point. They poke at small insecurities and act like they were joking. They bring up things you confided in them at the exact moment they know it will sting. And at the time you brushed it off, because chosen ones always try to see the best in people. But now, with distance, doesn't it all feel a little too precise, a little too intentional? That accidental comment that hit your weak spot, that harmless tease that left you thinking for days, that friendly advice that somehow made you feel smaller every time you took it. None of it was spontaneous. They weren't stumbling. They were strategizing. Maybe right now you're wondering, how did I not see it? But chosen ones rarely see manipulation immediately because you don't operate that way. You lead with sincerity. You assume others are being as genuine as you are. That's not a flaw. That's a sign of your character. But it also means you don't expect people to weaponize the parts of yourself you trusted them with. They didn't leave fingerprints. They left impressions, subtle marks that only make sense once you step back far enough to see the pattern. The truth is, they weren't building a bond, they were gathering leverage. They weren't cherishing your vulnerability, they were cataloging it. And once they felt they knew enough, they used it to twist conversations, gaslight you, or steer situations in their favor, all while pretending to still be on your side. Chosen ones, when someone studies you not to understand you, but to control you, that isn't a relationship, that's reconnaissance. And once you see this clearly, the illusion shatters instantly. You begin to realize that closeness was never closeness. It was coverage. They weren't seeing you. They were seeing what they could extract from you. And here's the empowering part. Once you recognize someone as a collector of weaknesses rather than a supporter of strengths, you stop negotiating with their intentions. You stop excusing their mistakes. You stop replaying conversations, wondering if you misunderstood. You didn't misunderstand, chosen one. You underestimated how deeply someone could study you with hidden motives. If you truly grasped how meticulously they analyzed you, how intentionally they pressed the right buttons, how quietly they catalogued your inner world, you wouldn't hesitate for a second. You would block them everywhere, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because now you know your energy, your inner world, your softness. They're not tools for someone else to use. They're treasures, and someone who sees them as data instead of depth never deserved access in the first place. Number 2, the masters of scripted apologies designed to disarm, not repair. When their apologies were scripts, not sincerity. Some people don't say, "I'm sorry," to heal you. They say it to reset you, like pressing a button they know you're too kind to resist. My dear chosen ones, let's talk about the performers. The ones who treated apologies like rehearsed lines in a play they never intended to stop acting in. Because if you truly knew how carefully some people crafted their remorse, how strategically they timed their regret, how deliberately they shaped their tone to crack open your heart, you wouldn't just walk away. You'd block them everywhere without thinking twice. See, chosen ones don't forgive casually. You forgive deeply, wholeheartedly, with the belief that people can grow beyond their mistakes. You give grace because you understand struggle. You give second chances because you know what it feels like to evolve. And this is exactly why certain people studied your forgiveness patterns like a roadmap. They knew your belief in potential was strong, and they knew how to weaponize it against you. These individuals were never truly sorry. They didn't come to you with reflection, accountability, or genuine understanding. They came with strategy. Their apology was not a sign of change. It was an emotional tool. They knew the exact moment to appear remorseful, the precise tone that would soften your defenses. They knew how to pause just long enough to seem overwhelmed with guilt. They knew how to tremble their voice, how to look down, how to breathe heavily as if wrestling with their conscience. It wasn't authenticity, it was choreography. And chosen ones, they learned your reactions like a script. They memorized the phrases that made you melt and the gestures that made you believe they finally understood your pain. They saw how quickly your heart opened when someone admitted fault. They observed how your shoulders softened when someone said they'd change. And once they figured out the formula, they repeated it, not to heal the bond, but to maintain control over it. That's the brutal truth. Apologies became their access card, not their accountability. Words like, "I'm sorry," "I didn't mean to," or "I'm trying," were never about you. They were about keeping you within reach, keeping you hopeful, keeping you emotionally invested. They relied on your belief in growth to excuse their refusal to grow. They counted on your compassion to overlook their patterns. They depended on your decency to blur the lines between accident and intention. And maybe right now, you're asking yourself, but why go through all that? Why pretend? Because chosen ones, your heart is powerful, your forgiveness is powerful, your presence is powerful, and people who fear losing access to you will manipulate whatever they must to stay close. Real accountability requires effort. But manufactured remorse, that's easy, that's quick, that's convenient. It doesn't require actual change, just the illusion of it. They mirrored your emotions, echoed your values, and said all the right things because they knew being believable was more important than being genuine. They understood that a chosen one's empathy is both a bridge and a doorway. Apologizing was simply how they kept walking across that bridge without ever meeting you halfway. But here's what they didn't expect. That clarity always comes. That chosen ones might forgive easily, but they do not stay blind forever. There comes a moment when the pattern becomes unmistakable, when the cycle becomes intolerable, when the same apology with different words finally sounds like a recording instead of a revelation. And when that moment arrives, everything shifts. You see that their remorse wasn't sincere, it was strategic. You see that their growth wasn't happening, it was being acted out. And suddenly, all the softness you once offered becomes strength. All the doubt becomes understanding. All the confusion becomes closure. Because believing in someone's potential does not require you to tolerate intentional harm. It does not bind you to cycles that drain you. It does not obligate you to stand in the same fire that someone else keeps lighting. Once you recognize the performance behind the apology, chosen ones, there is only one path forward: distance, protection, removal. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Not because you're cold, but because you've finally stopped letting others use your warmth to burn you. And if you truly knew how many rehearsed apologies were designed to keep you tethered, you wouldn't hesitate. You'd block them everywhere, swiftly, confidently, and without looking back. Number 3. The messengers who fed your life to people, hoping you'd collapse. When they turned your life into entertainment for people, praying you'd slip. Some people won't push you off the edge themselves. They'll just make sure the wrong crowd is watching when you stumble. My dear chosen ones, this one cuts deeper than most, because it exposes a truth many of you felt long before you had the words for it. Not everyone who listens to you cares about you. Some listen so they can report. Some listen so they can twist. Some listen because your struggles make great entertainment in rooms you weren't invited into. And the most dangerous part of it all, these aren't enemies standing across the battlefield. These are the ones standing right beside you, smiling, nodding, pretending loyalty, while quietly feeding your life story to people who want nothing more than to see you break. Let's be honest for a moment, chosen ones. If you knew the conversations that happened when you walked out of the room, if you heard the way certain people delivered your name to ears that were waiting eagerly for a reason to doubt you, if you understood how casually your setbacks were shared like gossip appetizers at someone else's private gathering, you wouldn't hesitate. You wouldn't blink. You'd block them everywhere with the speed of someone shutting off a fire alarm in the middle of the night. Some betrayals aren't whispers, they're broadcasts. Not loud enough for you to hear, but loud enough for the wrong people to benefit. They gave away pieces of your life like they were passing out flyers. Your struggles, your mistakes, your hesitations, all laid out for people who were already watching you with a critical eye. Your vulnerability became community discussion. Your missteps became entertainment. Your confusion became commentary. And you might be thinking, why would someone I trusted do that? Why would they hand my name to people rooting against me? Because, chosen ones, your presence threatened them, and your growth scared them. They couldn't stop your rise themselves, so they tried to sabotage the soil around you. They knew that if enough people doubted you, questioned you, whispered about you, that weight might slow you down. They believed that if they placed you under the microscope of the wrong audience, you'd shrink to fit their narrative. These individuals didn't gossip accidentally. They strategized. They tailored their stories to leave the perfect sting. They exaggerated details, added dramatic seasoning, and conveniently left out your wins. And the scariest part, they disguised it as concern. They pretended they were seeking advice. They pretended they were worried about you. They delivered betrayal wrapped in sincerity so convincingly that no one questioned their motives. Chosen ones, this wasn't clumsy conversation. It was calculated sabotage. And because these conversations were hidden behind closed doors, you felt the shift without knowing why. You suddenly sensed odd energy from people you barely spoke to. They knew things you never shared with them. They carried opinions about your life built entirely on someone else's twisted storytelling. You weren't paranoid. You were being watched from the shadows of someone else's narrative. The moment you realize this, the world doesn't look the same anymore. You look back, and every strange reaction, every subtle judgment, every unexpected cold shoulder suddenly makes sense. You start to see that the closeness you offered wasn't honored, it was used. The trust you placed in them was never safe. They were not teammates, they were tour guides giving others a front row seat to your toughest moments. And here's the part that flips your power back where it belongs. Once you know the truth, you stop explaining. You stop defending yourself to people who heard distorted versions of you. You stop mourning the image someone else destroyed. Instead, you block with clarity. You detach with purpose. You reclaim your peace with no apology. Because spectators don't deserve access to the main character. Gossipers don't deserve proximity to someone rising. And people who secretly root for your downfall should never again be allowed to clap for your success. Chosen ones, understand this deeply. If they could talk about you with people waiting for your failure, they never deserve to stand anywhere near your success. Disconnecting from them isn't cold. It's justice. It's protection. It's putting yourself back in the hands of those who genuinely value your presence. And if you truly knew the rooms your name entered without your permission, you'd block them everywhere without thinking twice. Number 4, the opportunists who treated your kindness as an open door to exploit. When your kindness became their favorite door to walk through. Some people don't take advantage of you because you're weak. They do it because they assume you'll never shut the door. My dear chosen ones, this truth might sting a little at first, but once it settles in, it becomes one of the most freeing realizations you will ever have. There are people in this world who never saw your kindness as a reflection of your character. They saw it as an opening, a loophole, a free pass. While you were offering compassion, they were calculating convenience. While you were extending understanding, they were extending their reach. And while you were proud of being someone who forgives, they were quietly taking notes on how far they could push before you finally snapped the door shut. This isn't because you were naive, it's because you were genuine. Chosen ones lead with sincerity. It's your default setting. You give people the benefit of the doubt because you understand that life is difficult, messy, unpredictable. You forgive quickly because you know the weight of holding grudges. You offer patience because you remember moments when patience saved you. But the very traits that make you rare are the traits some people interpret as opportunity. They don't see your heart, they see access. They don't see your virtue, they see a loophole. And the moment they realize your kindness doesn't come with immediate consequences, they begin to treat your boundaries like suggestions rather than limits. Each time you let something slide, they mentally note, so this is allowed. Each time you choose peace over confrontation, they whisper to themselves, good, I can go a little further next time. You're not imagining it. They do test you. They watch your reactions the way someone monitors a system to see where the weaknesses lie. They evaluate how quickly you forgive, how gently you respond to disrespect, and how easily you rationalize their behavior. They observe you like an experiment, carefully, quietly, methodically. And because chosen ones are naturally compassionate, you often miss the subtle escalation. It never starts big. It starts with a small request that drains your time, a joke that cuts a little too close, a favor taken for granted, a boundary crossed accidentally. By the time you realize what's happening, the pattern is already established. They've learned exactly how to manipulate your empathy. They've discovered that as long as they give you just enough remorse, you'll reopen the door. As long as they sprinkle a little charm, your patience will return. As long as they pretend to misunderstand your boundaries, you'll explain again instead of walking away. But chosen ones, here is the truth they never expected you to figure out. Your kindness is not infinite. Your tolerance is not free. And your heart is not a playground. The moment you wake up to the fact that people are using your goodness as a strategy, not appreciating it as a gift, everything changes. You start seeing the accidents for patterns. You start recognizing the subtle manipulations as intentional. You start understanding that the reason they kept crossing lines was because you kept cleaning up the mess without making them face consequences. And when that clarity arrives, chosen ones, it doesn't come softly. It hits like a tidal wave. Suddenly you realize that what you thought was mutual respect was never mutual at all. You were giving what they were never planning to return. You were offering what they were always planning to exploit. And that moment of understanding becomes a turning point. Because once you see someone treating your kindness as an entry point for manipulation, blocking them isn't pettiness, it's intelligence. Cutting them off isn't bitterness, it's protection. Walking away isn't cold-hearted, it's self-respect, finally taking the driver's seat. People love to twist the narrative and tell you that changing access means you changed as a person. But chosen ones hear this clearly. You are not unkind for removing yourself from situations where your kindness is weaponized. You are not wrong for refusing to let someone use your heart as their personal loophole. You are not cruel for choosing yourself over a dynamic that only drained you. You are wise, you are evolving, and you are reclaiming the peace that was being siphoned from you piece by piece. Some people only understand boundaries when the door is locked, the lights are off, and the bridge is burned. And trust me, if you truly knew how intentionally they took advantage of your kindness, you would block them everywhere without thinking twice. Number 5. The silent competitors who took your small wins as personal defeats. When your smallest victories triggered earthquakes in their insecurity. My dear chosen ones, listen closely, because this one cuts deep. Some people didn't envy your big successes. They envied your existence. They envied the way you carried yourself, the way you rose after every setback, even the way you smiled despite the weight you carried. Your smallest steps forward made their entire world tremble, not because you were trying to prove anything, but because your growth exposed the places where they refused to grow. Your glow didn't blind them. You simply illuminated the shadows they were trying to hide. That's the truth your enemies never want you to realize. They didn't resent your achievements because they were grand. They resented them because you made them happen. To them, every compliment you received was a crack in their confidence. Every goal you reached was a reminder that they were standing still. Your wins, even the tiny ones, felt like personal attacks because they couldn't process someone rising without them falling. Their envy was never about your success. It was about their insecurity, screaming louder than their logic. Chosen ones, these people watched you like competitors, not companions. While you moved through life simply trying to better yourself, they were keeping score, quietly, silently, internally. They smiled with their lips but frowned with their spirit. They congratulated you with words but questioned you with their eyes. Behind closed doors, they asked themselves, why them? Why not me? Why are they moving ahead while I'm still here? Your success became a mirror, and they hated the reflection. You weren't even trying to outshine them. You weren't competing. You were just being yourself. Yet somehow, your very presence made them feel like their own potential was slipping away. This is why chosen ones often feel tension when they grow, because the people around them start revealing how deeply they depended on your stagnation to feel adequate. And you know what makes this envy so dangerous? It doesn't appear loudly. It drips quietly into the tone of their voice, the way their encouragement suddenly feels heavy, the way their advice feels sharp instead of supportive. They downplay your achievements like they're doing you a favor. They slip in a joke that's a little too pointed. They ask innocent questions that make you second-guess your progress. It's subtle, it's slow, but it's corrosive. Every time you glow, they dim the room. Every time you elevate, they pull the floor just a little. Every time you step forward, they shift their posture like you've taken something from them. Chosen ones, these are the people who pretend to clap while secretly hoping you trip on your next step. They claim they want you to win, but only if you win small enough to stay beneath them, small enough not to threaten their comfort. They don't want you to break ceilings. They want you to fit under the limits they placed on you. And it can make you question yourself. Why do they act this way? Did I do something wrong? Am I too much? No. Chosen one. You didn't steal anything from them. They lost themselves long before you ever started shining. Your growth wasn't an attack. Your rise wasn't a rivalry. Your success wasn't a shot fired. But to someone drowning in insecurity, even your ripples feel like waves aimed at them. Once you understand this, liberation begins. You stop shrinking yourself to make others feel comfortable. You stop apologizing for progress. You stop dimming your light to protect their fragile egos. Their discomfort is not your assignment. Their jealousy is not your responsibility. Their resentment is not your burden to carry. Chosen ones, when you remove these people from your life, you are not being petty. You are being protective. You are preserving your joy, your momentum, and your mental clarity. Because the truth is simple, envy is a silent sabotage, and the people who secretly resent your growth will never help you sustain it. And if you truly knew what they whispered in private, how they compared themselves to you in silence, how they flinched at your smallest wins, you wouldn't hesitate. You'd block them everywhere without thinking twice, not out of anger, but out of recognition. Your growth deserves a safe space. Your wins deserve sincere celebration. Your journey deserves people who clap without confusion and cheer without competition. Chosen ones, keep rising. Let their envy expose itself. And when it does, protect your path and keep moving forward without ever looking back. Number 6. The boundary testers who pushed your limits to see how much you'd tolerate. When they kept testing your limits just to see if you'd break. Some people don't cross your boundaries by accident. They do it inch by inch, testing your silence like it's permission. My dear chosen ones, this one cuts deep because it exposes a truth most people are scared to admit. Some individuals didn't stumble into disrespect. They studied their way into it. They tested you the same way someone tests the durability of a fence, pressing lightly at first, then harder still, just to see where the weak spots are. They needed to know how far they could go before you finally said, enough. And maybe right now you're wondering, was it really that intentional, or am I overthinking it? Chosen ones, trust this. Nothing about their behavior was random. People who repeatedly disrespect you aren't confused about what they're doing. They're observing, calculating, evaluating your reaction like scientists tracking results in real time. That small comment they made that stung a little, that wasn't a slip, it was a test. That boundary they crossed without asking, a test. The promise they broke and then shrugged off like it was nothing. Another test. Every disrespect was a quiet question. How much will you let me get away with? And because you, chosen one, have a heart that always tries to preserve peace rather than create conflict, they saw your grace as a loophole. They mistook your kindness for weakness. They mistook your patience for permission. They mistook your silence for approval. You weren't enabling them. You were trying to maintain harmony, but they interpreted it as an invitation to push further. Here's the part that stings the most. They weren't learning from their mistakes. They were learning from your forgiveness. Every time you gave them another chance, they adjusted their strategy. Every time you rationalized their behavior, they raised the bar. Every time you minimized your own feelings in order to keep the connection, they tightened their grip. They didn't respect your boundaries. They measured them. They didn't value your empathy. They weaponized it. And they didn't appreciate your loyalty. They relied on it to cushion every blow they delivered. Chosen ones, let's call this what it is, a pattern of control. People who test your limits aren't trying to understand you. They're trying to dominate the emotional landscape. They want to see how far they can lean before you step back. They want to see how much they can take before you notice the depletion. They want to see how many times they can ignore your feelings before you finally realize you've been carrying the weight of a relationship built entirely on uneven footing. If you look back now, doesn't it seem almost choreographed? The fake apologies, the half-hearted efforts, the sudden sweetness right after they crossed a line, always just enough to keep you from walking away. Like someone who breaks a vase and immediately sweeps up only half the glass, hoping you'll step over the rest without noticing. They weren't clumsy. They weren't unaware. They were deliberate. And maybe you're thinking, why would anyone act like this? Why test someone they claim to care about? Because, chosen ones, your energy is valuable. Your attention is powerful. Your approval means something. People who operate from insecurity, fear, or control can't afford to lose someone like you. But instead of rising to meet your level, they pull you down to ensure they stay above emotional consequences. Disrespect becomes a tool to keep you off balance, uncertain, and easier to manage. But here's the part that flips the script. The awakening moment chosen ones always reach eventually. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you realize those mistakes were strategic, your tolerance evaporates. Once you understand they were studying your responses, your forgiveness becomes more guarded. Once you see the weapon hidden inside the apology, you stop giving them the privilege of coming back. Chosen ones, your peace is not a playground. Your boundaries are not experiments. Your patience is not a resource for others to exploit. And your heart is not an emotional training ground for people who refuse to learn respect. So when you finally cut them off, when you block them everywhere without hesitation, understand this. It isn't pettiness, it's clarity. It's choosing yourself. It's reclaiming your time, your energy, your dignity. It's saying, you don't get to test me anymore. I am not a project. I am not a loophole. I am not your emotional crash pad. You don't need to warn them. You don't need to explain. You don't need to justify. When someone repeatedly tests how much they can hurt you and still be welcomed back, the ultimate power move is simple. Don't let them back in at all. Number 7. The image protectors who guarded their reputation while wounding your reality. When they guarded their reputation while letting your feelings bleed. Some people don't fight to fix the damage they caused. They fight to fix the story others hear about it. My dear chosen ones, this truth might sting a little, but it will set you free faster than any apology ever could. There are people in this world who care more about how they look than how they treat you. Their reputation is their prized possession, polished daily, protected fiercely, guarded like treasure. But your feelings, your trust, your boundaries, those were optional to them, accessories they could ignore, bend or toss aside whenever it threatened their image. Chosen ones, you know exactly the type I'm talking about. The ones who shine in public but cast shadows in private. The ones who smile flawlessly for the world yet roll their eyes at your pain. When something goes wrong, their reflex isn't to heal the wound, it's to hide it. They scramble to shape the narrative before you can even process what happened. They twist stories, rewrite scenes, and play innocent with a straight face, all while you're sitting there wondering how the person who hurt you seems completely unbothered by your suffering. And maybe you asked yourself, why does it feel like I'm the only one feeling this pain? Because chosen ones care about connection. But these people, they care about perception. Your hurt wasn't their concern. It was a potential threat. Your tears weren't signs of damage. They were loose ends they needed to cover. They treated your emotional wounds as PR problems, not human experiences. And the worst part? They were incredibly polished at it. They knew how to shift blame so smoothly you'd start wondering if you were the problem. They knew how to sprinkle just enough charm, humility, or false remorse to convince everyone else that they were the reasonable one in the situation. To the world, they present themselves as level-headed, kind, misunderstood. To you, they present deflection, dismissal, and dismissal disguised as logic. When you tried to confront them, when you tried to explain how their actions cut deeper than they understood, they didn't lean in to understand. They leaned away to protect their storyline. Suddenly, your honest expression becomes too emotional. Your pain becomes overreaction. Your boundaries become miscommunication. Everything you feel gets minimized, while everything they say becomes magnified. Chosen ones, hear this. You weren't arguing with a person. You were arguing with their image, and the image always wins. Because the image never apologizes. The image never self-reflects. The image never takes accountability. The image is a costume perfectly tailored to gain approval and avoid consequences. Meanwhile, you're left trying to make sense of how someone can look so kind to everyone else, yet be so dismissive of your reality behind closed doors. And maybe you thought, if I explain better, if I stay calm, if I give them another chance, maybe they'll finally see what they did. But chosen ones, they did see. They just didn't care. Because caring might require them to take responsibility, and responsibility threatens the persona they work so hard to maintain. They weren't invested in healing you. They were invested in protecting the version of themselves they show the world. Once you understand that, something powerful happens. You stop expecting accountability from people who only care about appearances. You stop waiting for genuine apologies from someone who tailors their words to impress others, not to repair damage. You stop hoping that someone obsessed with public validation will ever prioritize private honesty. That clarity is liberating. Suddenly your confusion evaporates. The emotional fog lifts. You recognize that their behavior was never about you. It was about preserving their spotless image. And once you see that, it becomes shockingly easy to let go. You stop rationalizing. You stop justifying. You stop bending over backwards trying to be fair to someone who was never being fair to you. Chosen ones, this is where your power rises. You learn to protect your peace, because you finally understand they were never protecting you. People who prioritize perception over your reality cannot coexist with the peace you're building. They will always choose what makes them look good, even if it makes you feel small. They will always rewrite the story, even if it erases your truth. They will always defend their image, even if it means sacrificing the relationship entirely. So when you recognize this behavior, when you truly see how deeply calculated their facade is, you won't hesitate. You'll block them everywhere, not out of anger, but out of alignment. Because peace and respect cannot survive in the presence of someone who only cares about looking good while letting you hurt in silence. And chosen ones, you deserve far better than that. Number 8. The controllers who only appreciated the version of you they could shape, when they loved the puppet, not the person. Some people don't lose interest because you changed. They lose interest because you stopped being easy to control. My dear chosen ones, let this truth land where it needs to. Some people never loved you. They loved the version of you they could manage, predict, and mold to fit the script in their head. They were comfortable as long as you stayed small, agreeable, and conveniently silent. The moment you grew, the moment you claimed your voice, the moment you began to stand taller than the box they tried to keep you in, suddenly everything shifted. Their warmth cooled, their praise faded, their presence turned into distance, and you started wondering, what did I do wrong? But chosen ones, you didn't do anything wrong. You simply became someone they could no longer shape. You evolved beyond their comfort zone, and instead of rising with you, they resented the fact that you dared to outgrow the limits they set. They never loved the real you, they loved the edited version. The version that didn't challenge their ego, the version that didn't disrupt their narrative, the version that didn't make them question their own stagnation. This kind of manipulation always starts quietly. They praise you when your choices align with their expectations. They compliment you when your opinions don't contradict theirs. They support you just enough to keep you close, but not enough to help you rise. It's subtle at first, so subtle that chosen ones often mistake it for support. But look closer. Every compliment came with conditions. Every ounce of affection came with rules. And every display of approval was tied to how useful, agreeable, or controllable you remained. Chosen ones, people like this don't love your growth. They love your obedience. They admire you as long as your shine doesn't outshine them. They support you as long as your progress doesn't surpass theirs. They stay comfortable as long as you stay predictable. But the moment you break the script, the moment you evolve into a stronger, clearer, more confident version of yourself, their affection flips like a switch. Suddenly, the person who once claimed to care is cold, irritated, distant, or resentful, and you're left standing there confused, wondering where everything went wrong. What's dangerous about this dynamic is how quietly it chips away at your confidence. You start shrinking yourself just to avoid their disapproval. You start questioning your decisions because they don't seem happy anymore. You start dimming your light to keep their comfort intact. But ask yourself, why should your growth threaten someone who claims to care about you? Why should your evolution feel like a problem instead of progress? Chosen ones, people who love you conditionally, will always panic when you stop being programmable. They fear a version of you that doesn't need their validation. They fear a version of you that recognizes manipulation. They fear a version of you that stands tall without asking for permission. Because once you step into that version, you're no longer under their influence. And that's what they were trying to protect all along. Not you, but their control over you. When you finally begin to break free from their grip, you'll notice the shift. Suddenly, your ambition is too much. Your independence is a problem. Your confidence is arrogance. Your boundaries are disrespectful. That's not love fading. That's control losing its power. And instead of celebrating your evolution, they punish it. They withdraw affection. They criticize more. They act distant. They create emotional consequences for your growth because they no longer feel superior or secure. But chosen ones, here is your freedom, recognizing their conditional love for what it truly is, a transaction, a deal where your compliance is the price and their affection is the reward. And once you see that clearly, the spell breaks. You stop trying to win back something that was never real. You stop apologizing for growing. You stop shrinking to fit into spaces built for smaller versions of you. You begin to reclaim yourself, your voice, your strength, your evolution. And in that moment, cutting them off doesn't feel like loss. It feels like relief. It feels like stepping out of a cage you didn't realize you were in. Because chosen ones thrive when they stop living in boxes built by the insecure. Remember this, someone who only loves you when you are easy to control never loved you at all. They loved access. They loved advantage. They loved the version of you that didn't challenge the comfort of their own limitations. Blocking them everywhere isn't harsh, it's necessary. It's the moment you choose your growth over their grip. And when you do that, chosen ones, you step into a version of yourself that no one can ever shrink again. Number 9. The manipulators who thrived on your uncertainty because it made you easier to predict. When they treated your confusion like a playground for their control. Some people don't calm your storms. They study them because a cloudy mind is easier to lead than a clear one. My dear chosen ones, let's speak the truth plainly. There are people who don't just tolerate your uncertainty, they feed on it. They celebrate your confusion the same way a tactician celebrates knowing his opponent's next move. Not with applause, not with open malice, but with a quiet satisfaction that your hesitation keeps you predictable. Because as long as you doubt yourself, you are easier to steer. As long as you question your instincts, you are easier to influence. And as long as you remain unsure, they hold the advantage they never earned. Chosen ones, these individuals never wanted you confident. They never wanted you decisive. They never wanted you grounded in your own judgment. They wanted you second-guessing yourself because your uncertainty gave them a backstage pass to your decision-making. When you paused, they inserted their opinion. When you hesitated, they offered guidance. When you felt unsure, they positioned themselves as the one voice you could trust. But their support wasn't support. It was a strategic placement of influence, subtle, quiet, and deeply calculated. And I know the question forming in your mind right now. How could someone pretend to help me while hoping I stay confused? Because confusion is power to them. Your self-doubt is a doorway. Your hesitation is leverage. Your uncertainty is the glue that keeps them attached to your life, even when they no longer serve your growth. They don't need you broken, my dear chosen ones. Just uncertain enough that you believe you need them. They never clapped when you found clarity. Notice that? When you stood firm, when you trusted your intuition, when you made decisions without their input, they grew distant, irritated, or strangely quiet. But the moment you felt unsure, the moment your confidence wavered, they were right there, eager to help. Not because they cared, but because your confusion put them back in control. These people never pushed you down with force. No, chosen ones, they used subtlety. They weaponized softness. They disguised manipulation as concern. They told you things like, "I'm just trying to help," while gently nudging you toward doubt. They asked questions that made you rethink your choices. They gave advice that felt like clarity, but always looped back to them being the center of your decision-making. They created a dynamic where you felt lost, and they felt needed. And that need was their goal. The worst part, you didn't notice it happening. That's how expertly crafted their role was. This wasn't aggression, it was erosion. Slow, quiet, almost invisible. They didn't attack your confidence. They chipped away at it grain by grain, moment by moment, until you began to second-guess things you once knew for certain. You may have even reached a point where you wondered if your intuition was broken, when in reality it was being overridden by their influence. My dear chosen ones, understand this clearly. Anyone who benefits from your confusion is not on your side. Anyone who grows more comfortable when you grow more uncertain has hidden motives. Anyone who feels empowered when you feel lost is not a companion. They are an anchor chained to your progress. When you finally step back and notice the pattern, it hits you like a sudden gust of clarity. You realize their help kept you dependent. Their advice kept you shaky. Their concern kept you questioning yourself. They celebrated your confusion because it gave them predictability. They knew how to approach you, how to influence you, how to shape your choices, not because you needed guidance, but because they taught you to believe you did. And chosen ones, That realization isn't just freeing, it's transformational. Because once you reclaim your clarity, once you stop handing over your self-trust like it's optional, you become unpredictable again. You become powerful again. You become someone they can no longer steer with subtle doubts or gentle manipulations. And that is why removing them isn't revenge. It's realignment. It's choosing clarity over confusion, autonomy over influence, freedom over quiet control. If you truly knew how they smiled at your hesitation, how they thrived when you second-guessed yourself, how your uncertainty gave them a sense of dominance, you would block them everywhere without thinking twice. Not out of anger, but because your clarity is sacred. Your confidence is your compass. And your intuition, once drowned out, deserves to lead again. Chosen ones, reclaim your mind. Reclaim your clarity, and block anyone who ever dared to celebrate your confusion. As we step out of this truth and into clarity, chosen ones, let this sink deeply. Once you understand the intentions behind their actions, there's no room left for hesitation. Awareness becomes your armor, and distance becomes your freedom. If this message opened your eyes, strengthened your spirit, or confirmed what you already felt in your gut, support this journey by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and dropping 77 in the comments to claim your clarity. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs the courage to finally block what's been draining them.